Delighted to say joining me today is Claire Pearsall, former Conservative government advisor. Just on the rewiring of the state and the deregulation and all of that. I don't know how many times we heard that from your sodding lot. How many times we're going to hear that from this sodding lot and anyone else who ever gets elected. No one ever seems to do it. And as much as I hate a lot of the things that Elon Musk has been saying about Ukraine and other topics, I think his knowledge of world affairs is really questionable. But in terms of like deregulation in America and cutting back on taxpayer spending in the public sector in America, fully on board. But at least he's actually trying to do it.
Well, we have good words for it, don't we? Rewiring the state. I mean, what does that actually mean? If you're going to cut the number of civil servants, which is a big if, that Labour are suggesting, then fair play. Yeah. If that happens, it will be a very, very good thing.
Well, they're cutting it by 2%. I mean, 2%.
Any cut would be good, wouldn't it? And it's surprising that a Labour government
2% is just people leaving to get another job.
Yeah,
or retiring.
You and I know that.
I bet 2% retire every year.
Oh, I bet they do, and their nice gold-plated pensions. So if they can do anything with the state, that would be lovely. I don't suspect they will for a second. They like to speak a good game. They want to cut down on regulators, but then we'll undoubtedly create another for this.
Yes, exactly. There'll be a new body. Again, Sentence Council really not doing a good job. Ofgem, Ofwat, all these bodies. Really, no evidence that these bodies do anything to act for the consumer. That's certainly for sure. Anyway, I digress. Let's talk about Ukraine. Are you hopeful? The question we're putting to everyone on 0344 499 1000. Are you hopeful that the war will now end? What do you make of what appears to have come out of these talks in Riyadh?
I think you always have to be hopeful. Nobody wants a war to continue. However, you've still got to deal with Putin. So if Ukraine have accepted an idea of a 30-day ceasefire, there's no guarantee that Putin's going to do so without huge demands going alongside it. And do we actually trust him to stand by any ceasefire agreement in the first place?
Because he hasn't with any other deal. I mean, that was the point that Zelensky made to Trump when he got all angry with him in the Oval Office. But the Russians, I mean, they've made it really clear, stuff that Lavrov has said and other spokespeople for the Kremlin have said very clearly, that they won't accept any NATO troops in the country even after a ceasefire. Well, that's French and British. Well, that's pretty much only people offering to do it. They don't, no NATO membership for Ukraine, end of, so that sort of guarantee, and US won't offer a guarantee, we understand. But also we understand they want formal recognition of the land that they have basically seized, Crimea, the Donbass region. That's not going to be something that Ukraine is going to want, or indeed that any NATO country other than Trump's United States would actually want, because you're basically rewarding that aggression, saying, yeah, absolutely fine, you own that territory now. That's very different from just putting down the weapons. This ceasefire deal, that it was supposed to be about, sea and air, it actually involves all frontline.
Yeah. It does.
I mean, let's face it, I don't think Zelensky had any choice. If he doesn't agree to it, well, he's the warmonger. OK, so Putin says it's Putin that wants peace. Quite clever. Well, put it back in Putin's court. Does Putin want to have a ceasefire? I mean, that will probably help Ukraine more. I mean, they're the ones who who are, by the way, under attack at the current time. But why would Russia agree to a ceasefire?
You see, I don't think it's particularly in his interest to do so. The only reason I think that it will happen is that the sanctions are now starting to really bite in Russia. So all of the oligarchs that have millions of pounds, millions of dollars worth of investments are starting to look at the situation and go, this can't continue. Our, investments are going down, our money is getting less. And when you have that much money and that much power, I think that will shift anything more.
But the entire Russian economy now is geared around the war effort. Once you stop that war effort, what happens to it? It's the only thing driving the economy. It's 40% of government spending right now. And also, let's face it, we've got a man who really doesn't care about putting yet another young man into the meat grinder.
But he's also running out of those young men to put
not
in
as
the meat
quickly
grinder.
as the Ukrainians are.
No, not as quickly as the Ukrainians, but I think that is going to be a real issue, is that he's losing the ability to call up people to fight on his behalf. So I think you've got oligarchs getting pressure, the population dwindling. They're the ones that can go out and fight. Yep. So is it going to be in his interest to carry on? I'm not sure it is.
I'm just of the view that Putin's like, there's no reason to give up other than the fact he's playing Donald Trump like a little piccolo. Interesting development this morning in the last half hour. Of course, we were talking a little bit this week about this container ship that obviously involved in a crash with an oil, a fuel tanker in the North Sea. The captain of the So Long, this is a container ship, the one that basically just smashed into an anchored ship. It turns out, and this is a man who has been arrested, a man has been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter in connection with Monday's collision, but it turns out the captain of the So Long is a Russian national. Not just he happens to be Russian, he trained at the elite Russian naval school for senior naval officers. I mean, this is now turning into a Netflix box set, isn't it?
It is. I mean, I think even James Bond wouldn't have had this storyline, would they? I mean, this is quite something. When you look at the crash that happens, you can't miss
isn't it?
that enormous ship that was parked up. It's probably not a technical term. So to drive straight into it...
The ship's parked up.
To drive straight into it took some brass neck, really. And it doesn't surprise me that there could well be Russian involvement.
Although the expert we spoke to yesterday is making the point, never ever discount utter incompetence. And I'm a very much an incompetence cock-up theory person rather than this theory. But it's an interesting fact worth taking into account, I think we can safely say. Let's also talk Trump trade wars, the tariff wars. Some amazing, wars of words between Canada and America that we've seen, with this 25% tariffs, and if there's on steel and aluminium and other goods coming in from Canada and also from Mexico. They did a deal with Mexico, and then these 25% tariffs on all steel and aluminium across the world. It'll impact us. There's apparently some shipments which are going from Britain to America already sort of bought and paid for, but they won't because of bad weather in the Atlantic. They've been delayed, which means they're going to be hit with this tariff, so they become a quarter more expensive. That becomes an issue. It's going to affect everybody. Again, I don't understand. The problem is China subsidising their cheap steel and aluminium and then shipping it over that. That's China's the main problem in terms of killing off Western steel production. Just do it to China. But we know that China is going to come back. Interesting with Canada, though. I thought it was very interesting. The Canadian regional leader, state leader, who's basically said, well, a lot of North America, millions of your people get their electricity from us. We're going to put a tariff equivalent on the electricity for American households. Trump thinks this is outrageous and says at that point he will put his tariffs up to 50%. On Canadian steel. I mean, completely off the scale stuff. At which point now there's a meeting. This guy's going to be travelling to America. There's going to be a meeting. So it's all explosive. It's all chatter and talk. Now, it may well be that this all works and Donald Trump manages to get more preferential treatment on tariffs when it comes to, US goods. And the EU, I mean, they can talk a good game on this. The whole point of the EU is tariffs. It's a customs union. It's free trade within the EU, but outside it's tariffs. Yeah. So I don't know why the EU are getting all upset about, tariffs. That's literally what you do to every country you don't have a free trade deal with, which is most countries. One of the reasons why many countries in Africa are impoverished is because of the tariffs they face to sell any goods that are industrialised goods to the European Union, America, and otherwise. So I mean, shut your gob, frankly, Ursula von der Leyen. You're really not talking consistently, but. And there is a purpose to tariffs to protect homegrown industry and farming and to maintain your own national supply of goods. But this is clearly it's a power move, isn't it, by Donald Trump? Now, we're going to be talking to Justin Urquhart-Stewart a little bit later to explain how this all works. But Donald Trump doesn't seem to understand this is a tax, because he says this is going to be great for consumers. It could be good for American jobs. And it protects jobs. There's a reason why the EU has tariffs to protect, French farmers' jobs, Spanish fishermen's jobs, and German industrial jobs. That's what they're there for. It could be more onshoring of work, because basically the cheaper labour you're getting in Mexico or China is offset by the extra tariffs you're paying. So it's better to manufacture in America. And people having cheap goods is all very well, but if you haven't got a job, those cheap goods aren't affordable anyway. I do understand the argument there, but this sort of the bluster and the huge announcements, this is very difficult for business to deal with, isn't it?
It is. The uncertainty was showing yesterday in the US stock market. I watched it for about 20 minutes and just watching the red arrow sort of with all the stocks going down. I mean, that's going to have an enormous impact. But I think Trump needs to remember that these are ordinary Americans who will pay the price ultimately, especially when you look at things like aluminium, which make cans. So if you like a can of soft drink or a can of beer, perhaps, that's going to be more expensive. And that's what.
But he says
make
he's going to, the cost of living, again, we talk about immigration an awful lot and wokedom and things that he get really happy about what he's doing about. Again, I don't have Trump derangement syndrome. I just take him policy by policy. There is no politician that I admire 100% for every single thing. But he's good on a number of things. On this, I think he's wrong. And there will be many Republicans who are more into free trade who will be appalled by this. But this, at the end of the day, tariff is a tax. It's just another word for a tax.
Yes.
And it's a tax that ultimately gets fed to consumers. Now, the tax is officially paid by the company that exports to your country. They face that tariff. But they don't just... No company is absorbing a 25% extra cost. They're going to pass it on to the consumer. Now, that makes those goods more expensive, so people then go, well, I'll buy something made in America instead of something made in Europe or in China or Canada. However, that also means, realistically, they've got a choice between a higher good and American. The American goods may well go up in price as well.
Well, of course they will, because they want to be able to increase the profit, to provide the jobs and all of that. So whilst I agree that you need to look after homegrown talent and you need to look at how you use what you've got in your own country, things like car production in America is going to be incredibly difficult because the parts are often in one state.
They seem to move things
down into Mexico,
Canada, America,
up to Canada, and you think there's some of them that's 6 levels of tariff going to be on one part for a car, which makes cars.
I think he's now excluded the car industry because of that. But again, you should know this before you bring the tariff in. These sort of sweeping announcements don't do anyone any good. But we shall see. What do you think of Britain's reaction? Because the EU has hit back with the equivalent, I think it was 26 billion pounds worth of tariffs on different goods, not on steel and other goods that the US exports to the EU. We have not retaliated. We are sort of in talks about a possible free trade deal. Do you think that is weakness on Keir Starmer's part, or do you think it's actually rather wise?
No, I think it's rather wise to not have a knee-jerk reaction like the EU has done by ramping it up and getting very angry. I think that we need to sit and settle and see how this is going to impact us as a country, but also that trading agreement is going to be much better if you're not going to anger the other side by pushing them into a corner.
Although there does seem to be a situation where Trump responds very well to someone, when the Canadians go, right, well, we're going to put the same tax on electricity for American households who get our electricity. He seems to back down.
But does he? I mean, there are still tariffs going for Canadian goods, so he hasn't backed down all of the way. And also, that's their nearest neighbour. They share a border. We're a little country that's very far away. We've not quite got the same pull as that.
Well, I mean, Canada's got a bigger impact. I mean, something like 60% of their trade is with America. I mean, it's a huge amount, isn't it? Love to hear your thoughts on that, about how we should respond to that, actually, if at all. Give us a call, 0344 499 1000. Also, just want to talk about, there's so much I want to talk about, reform, ongoing battles, but also the extraordinary words of John Hunt, who... I can't believe he lost 2 of his 3 daughters and his wife to the Crossbow killer, Kyle Clifford. He was found guilty, pleaded guilty to the murder of his ex-girlfriend, her sister and her mother in a Crossbow knife attack. He then pleaded not guilty, but was found guilty of raping his ex-girlfriend, a misogynist, just an all-round nasty piece of work. That's why she dumped him after 18 months, because she realised that he wasn't a good guy. Came back to basically a revenge killing. He also shot himself with a crossbow and is now in a wheelchair. Good. Behind bars for the rest of his life. He got a whole life tariff. But I think the most 2 significant things in the court case yesterday, one, we were talking about on air, he refused to come up for the sentencing, and the judge decided not to force him to come, or indeed to even watch the sentencing and the victim statements on a video feed. I mean, I'd have personally dragged him out of his wheelchair, got happily myself and dragged him into the courtroom, gagged him if necessary, end of. I just find it extraordinary that a convicted killer isn't required to do that, and I'm sure somebody who worked in the Home Office, you'd agree with that.
Yeah, absolutely.
Why was that ever allowed?
I don't know. It shouldn't be. It really shouldn't. You need to.
I thought the Tories were going to deal with that when it came up last year.
Well, I think they were. I think the election then kind of got in the way.
There's an awful lot of things that got in the way of Rishi Sunak doing stuff, wasn't there? It's almost like he chose when the election would be.
Really? A shocker. But I think, no, people who commit these crimes need to understand, need to listen.
I mean, my thing is, if he refused to go in his jail cell, you'd force him into the jail cell.
Precisely.
If he refused to come out for food or something, you'd force him. You'd be able to force him into the sodding court.
You need to sit there and face what you've done.
If he wants to have a full-on tantrum and scream and shout, fine, we'll just sit and watch you make an idiot of yourself.
But can't you put them in one of those sort of perspex boxes, which you can have piped-in sound, but we don't hear the scream?
I just think it's untenable. You're a guilty man. Yeah, I mean, if you're in it until the point when you're found guilty, you're technically, an innocent man, and therefore, you shouldn't be forced to attend court if you don't want to. I get that, but once you're guilty, sorry, mate, end off. But also the most extraordinary statement from John Hunt, who lost, as I say, two of his. He said he lost 3/4 of his family. I can't imagine what his other daughter, Amy Hunt, is going through as well. And she said, she wished it was her and their place, which is just an awful thing for her to think. But his words, I really admire him for this. A, saying what he said, but B, the fact that he. So many people in this scenario say, I think, the right thing, they feel, where they sort of talk about, forgiveness and moving on and things. That's not how I feel if someone had killed 3 members of my family. I've got to be honest with you. And his words, I thought they were just so powerful. He said, Kyle, just remember one thing. Whatever sentence you're about to receive, whatever misery lies ahead for you, remember on your dying day, there will be no release for you, Kyle. The screams of hell, Kyle, I can hear them now. They're going to roll the red carpet out for you. He described the killer as callous, cowardly and vindictive. He said Louise, his daughter, who died, enjoyed more success and fulfilment in one morning than you achieved in your entire miserable life. He says, I simply say that you are a psychopath who, for the duration of your time together with Louise, was able to disguise yourself as an ordinary human being. You managed to maintain that veneer of decency. He's talked about how proud he is of his daughter for having broken up with him. But he said, whatever sentence you're about to receive, whatever lies ahead of you for the next 6 years, your days on earth are done. There will be no release for you. The red carpet will come out for you. He said, at that point, when the person you could have been meets the person you are, you will realise your miserable fate will last for eternity. I've just got so much admiration for him for speaking on behalf of his wife and 2 daughters and the rest of the family who left bereaved, and saying what needs to be said to this awful man.
Yeah, I mean, I'm the same as you. I wouldn't be offering up any forgiveness. And this was such an incredibly moving and strong statement. Hands down, he is the bravest man I think I've seen in a long time.
But also, it's weird that people tend to applaud people for showing forgiveness.
No,
I mean, there are times for forgiveness. I mean, again, if this guy had shown any remorse or respect or but he was a wrong. He was a nasty little misogynistic. It turns out also apparently racist. One of the reasons why Louise dumped him was because he was a nasty little piece of work, controlling and unpleasant. And basically he couldn't deal with the fact he'd been dumped apparently in a very nice and respectful way. And he was a power move. I mean, call him what he is, and he will, I don't believe in heaven and hell, but my God, if there is one, he will rot in it.
Yes.
But I think what John Hunt said was really, really powerful and needed to be said.